Hey, hello. Hey, Alex. Hey, Vingo. This is a Wednesday checking in. I am Chris from Airwindows, and we're going to do some programming on the upcoming Console X because I'm still working on the visuals of it. So, hi. And let's jump right in. Boop. So yeah, also I could set you up with the wood stove cam, but I'm not sure it's worth bothering today. I've got a nice cup of coffee and I am getting ready for what's going to be quite a week because I have plans for this coming week. In particular, I have plans for this upcoming Tuesday because I'm getting a colonoscopy so that people can find out whether I have cancer or not. Probably not. Oh, I can answer some of that. There's a bunch of lines of code here, but plugin editor C let me just drag that down. Plugin editor C, there is 1,349 lines of code so far. It's medium cold, but not like in here because I have my stove going. It's been hovering around freezing. It's like it's winter time up here in Vermont. That's how that's going to be. So here's something I can do. Let's give myself a background of blinking lights. Gotta love blinking lights. That'll also warm up the room very slightly, but only very slightly because it doesn't really draw that much power. So here's what we're doing. Oh yeah, it's colder than that. 10C is warmer than freezing. However, I've been running the wood stove all morning, so it's not cold where I'm at. So I've got some random music. That is a vinyl record that I bought at a local coffee house, which also serves as a record store, unless it was Bull Moose, which is sort of a chain record store. And the reason I opened that up is so I could... Oh, did you just crash? I think it just crashed. Weird. What is its little problem? Okay, well, let's build that plugin again. And it says it succeeded. And maybe it didn't like that particular... Why, yes, let's recover from that crash. Let's see if we can run the newly rebuilt plugin. Yep. So here's where I'm at. I've got some stuff to figure out here. Some basic ideas around things. One of the things I'm wondering is whether I should be putting in like per plugin default sizes and whether I can even do that. We've got our reflowing controls. And I've got their sizes shifting and scaling around. The last person to see this, I see that they are touching each other, but the last person to see this was in fact Bacon Paul, and he saw it before I had really done this part and tuned and adjusted it. This is what the console X interface is meant to do. So as you can see, we're reflowing the size, and I'm making some decisions around the ways in which these line up. And I can already see something I might want to look at. For instance, the way these are lined up. If I line this up, the positioning of these things is basically okay. But I move it to here and I run into a problem. That problem is as follows. Since the last time you've seen any of this, I've recoded the way these knobs are drawn. And what I have to do is recalculate the height of each of these panels for the purpose of making the angled ones. See, we're underneath this panel and we're looking over the top of this panel, and I've already got a control where you can tell it not to angle this steeply. These are also slightly angled, like we're slightly on top of this and slightly under that. But I need to, and then if you get to the these workflows, there are no angles anymore because in one high or one wide, putting an angle on the top and bottom ones becomes meaningless. Also, you can squish it so that you can only see the meter if you like. That might work for situations where you're operating it using the control surface. The bus version of this would be the one where I would use the GUI version, because one thing about it is I have this meter here. And the meter will show me stuff that's more useful to me in mix rather than the style of metering that's more useful in mastering. Oh, Alex. If I remember correctly. No, apparently not. I thought you said you were in Siberia, but you're one of my UK peoples. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of cold, although seeing as I am Finnish to a pretty substantial extent, I kind of take to cold pretty naturally. Anywho, what we're doing is dealing with some of these adaptations. Namely, if you have it at this aspect ratio, it's two lines of things. It's a compression and a gate, and it's the stone compression. Here's your range, and then here's the fire compression and gate. It's not that dissimilar to Stonefire comp, except for that it's also a gate. And you get to independently use the ratios. So, and then we've got our EQs, which are predictable behavior. They're always in these sort of triangles of controls. I've simplified things to be the same sizes of large and small knobs. But what ends up happening is I have this tilt effect in the knobs, which I think will come in more handy when I do other plugins, simpler plugins that use this technique in order to draw stuff in a more interesting way, but don't have to fit like 36 controls in here. So I do have a way of making this angle go away. Airwindows globals. So if user tilt goes to, and it's probably not going to default to 1. If user tilt goes to 0, and we'll change the color while we're at it. All of a sudden, it does not have those angles on the tilts any longer. And so we have this look, and the blinking lights still blink. Those are going to be gating and compression indicators and will flash brightly rather than be dimly flickering things. I want the gate and the compression to flash brightly when they engage, but have the duration have more to do with the depth of compression and so on. And you can see that I have this much flatter now. In fact, all of the layouts are much flatter now. Honestly, it looks pretty nice. I'm contemplating just letting it be this, because it is getting away from a sort of visual issue. But here's the thing I was pointing out before. Console X will work the same way as my other console plugins. There will be a Console X channel, which you see here, except for it doesn't have the actual audio code in. And there will be a Console X bus, likewise. All the same controls and everything, too. And then there will be a Console X something else. I've named it, but it's been so long since I worked on it that I forget what I called it. But it will be just the audio tools and without the console software, for in case you needed to use an additional layer of it, or you were putting a layer of console on the sounds in the DAW and then running it into a tape simulation and then running it into the actual mix and putting another layer of console on. So it would be kind of like that. Now I'm wondering what it was. I can find out. Pre. I called it pre. So Console X pre is using just the audio qualities of this rather than using it in the console system, which also means you could use the Console X pre and then just run like Console 9 or Console 0 or whichever one you preferred if you liked another version better. Hey, Grens, all is reasonably well. It's going to be a challenging week for me because I have a colon cancer check this upcoming week, so I've already engaged upon what they call prep. And it does not mean, oh, well, the text is a challenge in its own right, because you see, that is text that is meant to scale with the size of the thing. Like here is a somewhat larger version. You can kind of read it, but it needs to work with every possible color. Like, let me close that for a second. Suppose you were going to do this. If you needed to run console, but you wanted all of your console to do that, well, it interferes with my being able to draw the labels, doesn't it? Because I can't draw them in black. This would be for deeply goth people. In fact, I've adjusted it. You can see that these controls are now blue rather than red, but you can't really see very well because it doesn't show up very well. But take my word for it, or maybe I will skip ahead to a section in here where it will light these up a little bit more. Or not all that much more. And so those LEDs are now blue, and you have user control over what the color of your blinking lights are. I could put one in fader too, come to think of it. I'm not sure whether I feel a great need to, but I could. But yeah, see, the problem with the labels is like this. And also I'll notice that you can obscure the labels with the controls sometimes. But you have to be able to make the entire color of it like completely jet black and still have there be some form of lettering there. Or let's blind your eyes. With green LEDs. Oh no, I have a better idea. So yeah. So some people might like that. And I need the lettering still to be visible. You can pick different letters as well, but it has to be able to adapt to any color or color-coded according to what the track color is, because it reads track colors in Reaper. If I could come up with a way of making it read track colors in other places, I would do that as well. And then since the LED color is white, it's becoming grays here. It's not actually lighting up properly. But yeah. So if you wanted a stark white, okay, so Andrew Huang, this is for you. Here is the stark white colored interface to go along with stark white colored rooms and having synthesizers also in stark white color. So yeah, or you could make the LEDs light up in black, in which case they wouldn't do anything. I would be really excited if I can get this finished before 2025. Oh, you're going to have to. You must wait. I can't do anything other than force you to wait because I can't put this out just yet because we're not done. Let me put some of these back. Also, remember how I was talking about the user tilt? When I put it to full user tilt, now we have this going on. And as you can see, it's using up slightly less space on top and bottom because now you're looking into the plugin rather than just across the plugin. But it's made some little changes, like these are slightly smaller than the other ones. It's all to do with the tilt, and you can't see as easily on the fader. And the whole idea is to make more space for this to register. But then here's the thing I was talking about before showing up again. And yeah, you can see with the full user tilt, there's a variety of problems that come up. Like if you really loved the vibe of this, then that would be all good and fine. Trouble is, there's some concerns with that, like the full tilt kind of gets in the way of being able to read the labels. And there's not a lot I can do about that without like decoding and debugging that. Also, these are slightly angled, but I feel as if they could be slightly more angled than they are. Like you can see the tiltness of that. That's a very steep tilt, and this is not nearly half the tilt of that, so it doesn't look as if it's a consistent amount of tilt between all of these things. Instead, these are not tilted as much as the ones in the very top and the bottom, so that could use fixing if I'm going to keep this and use it in this way. And most importantly, see the big space between the top bank and here, and then these are tightly connected to each other, and then there's no space between the third bank and the fourth bank. So all of these need to be moved up. So I need to figure out what that is about. And I'll tell you what that is about. It's about me going back into here and finding where it says resized, and finding where it says probably 4H3W, something like that. So that's 6H2W. That doesn't have any tilts in it. And then 4H3W means 4 panels which are each tilted at a different amount because I'm trying to simulate that behavior. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if you were able to compile stuff, you'd be able to build this off of my website. It's on GitHub, but I will do my level best to get this all done. It's probably going to be more popular when I continue this because basically everything that I build is going to have that ability to define colors and things. That's called Airwindows Globals, so all the GUI plugins use that. I have not successfully gotten Bacon Paul to incorporate any of that into Airwindows Consolidated, but technically he could. He's not excited enough about the idea, and it would probably also be a bunch of work. But here's what we've got. So the reason it was doing the thing, panel tilt 0.5f minus skew, and then 0.5f minus skew times 0.5, that's the tilt. But it's not nearly enough. So what I could do is have it 75% of that, and then again 0.5f plus skew. Skew will go from 0 to 1. And that determines whether the thing is tilting way back or tilting way forward. And then we've got some offsets, and here's where it's going wrong in terms of positioning. Offset y equals 0, and then the top one needs to be offset y py. It starts out as being, so let's see now. If it's area get height divided by 4 and offset is just py, then it's going to step down to the first corner of the panel, but it's going down too far. If I just did py minus skew, that would mean nothing because py is actually a larger number than that. Py is get height divided by 4, so it's like a couple of hundred or so. However, offset y equals py minus py with some kind of factor is not actually working. So So that's a question. So what I'm going to do first of all is see what happens now that I have the new angles, the new tilts. We're still looking at total amount of tilt here. Also, since you can specify any amount of tilt you want, you can have a very subtle version of this effect, or just lots. I'm designing it around the maximum amount of effect in the hopes that it'll make it behave if you use some other form. So again, that looks basically normal. And one thing to bear in mind is that the threshold in these three little knobs, either the compression or the gates, are not actually taking up the full space, so we don't really get a good sense of how much space these are taking. See how sharply tilted this is? We're looking underneath that. It's on the top panel. And this is so sharply tilted that you can't hardly see it, and we're looking at it on a bottom panel. And this is about the same size as that, and it's a roughly appropriate size. But then when we go to the 4, now we're starting to look a little closer to what I'd want to see. But I still have too much of a space up here and not enough of a space down here. See, the lettering on low mid is actually intersecting with the top of this control. It's clearly not working right. However, the amount of tilt is. Like, that's the whole purpose. If I had one that had 5 controls, 5 panels, the middle panel would be flat. If I have one that has 3 panels, top is angled, bottom is angled, middle one is flat. Because it's meant to be kind of like, you know how if you have a, hang on a second. My wood stove is running out of juice. I should put another log on there. Like, for instance, this log. I'll put this log on. There we go. I am going to drag out the wood stove cam. I'm probably going to have to do that again, so let's make it more entertaining. As follows. There we go. There we go. Gotta love the wood stove cam. I'll leave it sitting on that. Why would you need to look at my face when you can look at the wood stove cam? What's not to like about the wood stove cam? What's my favorite non-Airwindows plugin? Surge XT. That's an easy question. That's because I'm that happy with Surge and its entire open source crew and all the people that are involved with it. Plus, it is my favorite soft synth. So yeah, Surge XT. I don't really use any sound processing plugins of any kind other than mine. Yeah, it is actually a relatively new wood stove. let's think. I'm trying to think of whether it was from like a company called Green Mountain Hearthstone something or other. But it is a soapstone lined wood stove with a kind of internal air vent thing which sort of reburns that's why you see the fire swirling around in the way that it does. Let me see if I can focus it appropriately. There we go. So the way that you see the fire up at the top is because it's got air channels that blow air up at the top across the top layer of soapstone. And that reburns that, making it a more efficient burn. And then it cuts a corner around that top layer, which is 2 soapstones that I can remove for cleaning it, and goes back and through a catalyst. And as a result of that, using that kind of reburning technology and the catalyst means that it actually is about the least polluting wood stove that I can get, but also one of the most efficient. So like burning up all the little bits of smoke in the exhaust of your wood stove is not only good for the environment compared to what you might be doing, but it's also good for getting more warmth out of it. So yeah, and it is not my only heat source, but it's the primary one. Like I have, the house I'm in has a old antique oil furnace that used to be a coal furnace. That's how old it is. It's not very efficient, but it's only to keep the place from freezing if the wood stove isn't going. And that is like the background of like it gets to be I prefer to stop my pipes from freezing if I'm not. Also, although a basement is not going to be quite as cold as the full outdoors, because if you dig down far enough, it's going to be like 50 degrees forever. But having a wood stove in a living area like this isn't actually going to do that much for pipes in the basement, so it's nice to have a furnace there as well. But anyway, I've got this stuff to do. And here's where I left off, was acknowledging that the size of these is pretty good, although I got to wonder whether I could make this work better. Because understand, the way this works, I can specify how tall these panels are. Wonder if I can, no, I can't. I thought maybe I could select and drag and have a little square dotted outline. Like I can say how much the area that this fits into occupies and where the top of this starts, which is a little bit lower than that. I can scooch it up until it's touching this meter, although I prefer not to. I can tell this to be taller or not as tall. And these things kind of adjust. Like you can see that this one is fighting to try to overlap these 2 knobs. I'd probably want to dial that back half a hair just to be able to make it behave better. But given that I'm specifying, like, I'm keeping the width the same, and as I scooch up here, it starts to squish these things because I'm not allowing enough vertical space. It's restricting the vertical space, but if that was all that I was doing, in theory, I could continue squishing this until these gaps closed up, except for no, because as I squish it, right at this point is when they start getting smaller, especially this one in the middle here. And it's not because it's getting any narrower, it's because the vertical space is being restricted. but it's clearly not using all the available area. So there's room for me to fool with this a little bit. It's just that it's being hard-coded to doing what I want. And interesting how no matter what I do with this, and that's actually fitting in, well, no, that's actually not fitting in very well either, because this panel is squinched right up against this bottom panel that is so sharply edged. Like there's space here, padding here, no padding here. So something is wrong with that. So let's see whether I can change that. 4 high, 3 wide is the one that I'm talking about. Center panels are larger. Top panel is smaller. And then the position, this offset, that is what this is about. So if I am not mistaken, if I tell this to be plus rather than minus, and then the middle one, see, this is the top panel. Here's the middle panel. It's supposed to be minus a factor, making it be closer. Here is another middle panel, and then here is let's duplicate this. I got a feeling that maybe that this part is not actually going to work. So always all about the parentheses, just to force everything to do what I think it does. I'm never very good at remembering what precedents of arithmetical operators are. And now you see that this says offset py plus something and then plus something. So now literally all of these say py skew plus 0.5f. So each of these are, and then the position, the size of it is top panel smaller, center panel larger, bottom panel smaller. Py ends up being the height of the whole panel, and then we redo it over again each time. So this is how I go about fooling around with this stuff. And we're going to see what that did. Because I'll tell you, the stuff at the very bottom here, the height of this middle panel was not good. And I've probably just made it worse, unless I just made it better. But I don't know until I try. We're going to open up yet another piece of music. Not long ago, and here we are. Didn't change this one. Did change this one. Look at how much overlap we've got. That's clearly wrong. So we've got a bit of an answer then. We've got all of the space up here, but then I reversed the sign of one of these. I reversed the sign of this. And rather than being offset as py minus py times skew times 0.5, and minus again, and minus again. Now we'll see what that does. Oh, gotta quit out of trusted wave first. Because I could just tell when I was changing that, I just made it go even further in the wrong direction, and that tells me that the sign of the math I was doing was off. I've just changed all of those so they are all offset in a different direction. This will be, assuming that Pamplejuice continues it will be on all of the formats that Airwindows Meter is available on. And I have very little choice in the matter, because if Pamplejuice isn't targeting a format, there's very little chance I'll be able to add it. But if Pamplejuice and Airwindows Meter does already target a format, you should be able to have that. When it says Shaded Dog Debussy, that's because this is off of an old classical music record. I recorded these because I was looking to do a kind of sampler experiment. Oh, look at that. Didn't expect that. So the final offset clearly is not correct. Interesting. So let's fix that. It's immediately obvious that the whole bottom row just got scooted up way more than it should. That is obvious. That is super obvious. So this is totally wrong. And I'll tell you why. It's because the starting position of that needs to be added with more of the area height if it is at a more striking tilt. It is going in the opposite direction of the other one. That said, we moved everything. The first offset is still at 0. But this offset is not at all what it's supposed to be. And skew, okay, that's interesting. Panel tilt is 0.5 minus skew. That means skew can be a negative number. That's going to be affecting things. So that's probably what's confusing me, is I'm feeling like it's monopolar, but it's actually a bipolar value that I'm fooling with. And that is causing some consternation. However, we can but try. We'll see what to do. We're well, actually, hang on. 0.5 minus skew. Skew is varying between minus 0.5 and positive 0.5. That's what it's doing. Anyways, that is certainly causing some consternation, but I should be able to sort it out. One hopes. Polish off all of my coffee before it is too far past 3 in the afternoon. Because we're digging into this now. Okay, so I bet you because if there's one of these that is negative, then I'm flipping the polarity. No, I think that's still about correct, but let's find out what it does. This should not work, but maybe it will. In particular, I can see one reason why it might. Panel tilt goes from 0 to 1. Skew only goes from 0 to 0.5, so I'm going 0 to 0.25. Py minus Py is 0, but it can't ever quite get to 0, can it? Although, hang on. I think I'm on the wrong one. Yeah. No, top panel is smaller. This is about the right amount, but this is the one. Py is the height, offset y is where it starts, so that matters. So py minus py times skew. Let's see what happens when we do this. Offset y is a different one now. We can but try. I'm going to see if I can't get this behaving in some way. Also, I feel like let's return to our default light gray color. Can go with all kinds of colors if you like. Brandenburg concertos take entirely too long to load, so maybe not bother with that. They sound like this. Bach. It's interesting hearing Bach in comparison with stuff like Beethoven and whatever in the process of doing these recordings. And again, the idea from these recordings is maybe I could sample some orchestral sounds out of it. Oh, hello. Hi, you're looking a lot better. As if the thing that I did might have been the correct thing. Maybe a little more than I needed. And this is the top one. This is the 4 high. The position of this one seems about right. See, all of this stuff I can continue to tweak to try to get it to use up all of this space appropriately. Remembering, of course, that if I set user tilt to 0, it's just evenly dividing everything. All of this is a method for getting the knobs to be a little larger than you would have if they had to be just circles. And spacing them out slightly differently as well. One thing I am noticing is that these top guys are not... Oh no, if you stretch it out just a little bit, it starts looking better. That's not bad. Sampling as both. I would like to, I can repurpose some of that for music, because if I snag just little tiny bits of, that's unrecognizable. Question becoming, can I make any use of Bach? Because Bach is just, it's very static. It's constantly these deeply predictable, constant things going on. So, and anyway, one of the things I was thinking about was, can I actually do anything with this? So, let's direct my attention towards this for a moment, because I was trying to answer those questions. Angles, top section. Angles are not doing this any big favors, but I can probably live with it. It doesn't like the way this is arranged very well. However, the spacing is not that bad. So tell you what, let's start doctoring this. I'm looking at so yeah, py area divided by 4. Then we adjust it. So the Y starts at this, and we've got it set up so that the top one works right even when it's extremely small. And yeah, I'd like to analyze some of these. I'd also like to do synthesizers in, for instance, SurgeXT, and design them. Like I've made those Modern Tron patches for SurgeXT, which I haven't put out, by the way. I would like to go in and tailor some SurgeXT patches to more closely resemble things like real orchestral recordings, but have it be, sawtooths and things like that. Start with surge waves and make them into reasonable simulations of orchestral recordings just by tone shaping them appropriately. Anyways, where were we at? This seems okay. This seems to start at about the right place. This seems to also start at perhaps the right place, but maybe not so much. So, what do we got? I feel like this might be too high up. Offset Y, PY minus 0.9. That will start it a little bit lower. F. Here's our third panel. Offset is, oh, interesting, okay. So if we started at exactly PY times 199, it's probably too low down, but we have adjusted for that now. Let's get a little frisky. If we adjust those, what's happening is this one is moving down a fair amount, really. Possibly too much. This one is not being offset up as much, and this is pretty much staying where it is. Like these are staying where they are. If that works, we can start fooling with the size of them, because everywhere it says PY plus PY times skew. I can also do PY times skew times 1.2 or whatever, and just start expanding the size of those as they go. Knowing that if I do it in that way, and then make these angles not be as extreme, it will then dial back if you set user tilt to a smaller number, and I can come up with a nice sort of happy medium. So let's see. Down one. Again, shaded dog means this is a RCA Victor with a particular label. Is Strauss down one. I haven't been altering this, and only the 4x3 and the 3x4 include these tilts. All of the 2x2s do not include tilts. Aha. Okay, so when I had it at PY skew times 0.9 or full on, it was better. When I had this at skew 0.5, that's actually not so far off though. Also remember, if I adjust these by making them bigger, it's going to take up more space. For instance, if I was to take this second panel, which needs to be higher up, and enlarged it vertically, where it says py plus py times skew. If I continue to enlarge that, then this is going to overlap the other one more. So this is where I adjust that stuff. And I think the next thing is to scooch this up here so that it tucks up next to this more closely. And I believe what I can do with that is I wonder whether I can just straight up take it like this. Because remember, skew is going to be like 0.5 or something. So it's not impossible that I need to make it be larger than 1.0. Again, this is a complicated picture machine. And there is no correct answer. I can't look this up anywhere. I have to make it just work. I have to make it just do what I want. I feel like the vertical positioning of this is not bad. It needs to be slightly less cramped up to the top than that. Or this one needs to be slightly lower, or both. But remember how I could make this be larger? Rather than just scooch this down, I can expand it down. So let's see about that. If I expand this down about yay much, about the height of this cursor, and then I expand this down by about the height of this cursor, that'll kind of work. Maybe. So let's see what we get. Firstly, the top and bottom panels. Top panel is smaller, so I'm subtracting this, but if I subtract a smaller amount, it'll make the top panel be just a tiny bit larger than that. The other one also matches. They're the same size. I can adjust the sizes relatively to each other as well. And then this, the center panel is larger. It's py plus a factor having to do with skew. And so what we're going to do is times (1.1f) multiplication is commutative, so I can just stack those things together like that. And we've now just adjusted those things so that the size of those steeply angled ones is slightly bigger, and so is the size of the center ones. That should have taken up some of those margins. Oh, Simon Morris, you're quite welcome. We're just doing a little hanging around, and it's not taco day today, but it will be tomorrow. It'll be my last chance for tacos until the following week, because again, once you start getting old, if you can, if like I am a Vermonter, so Green Mountain Care is the Vermont state health insurance, and go and get a colonoscopy or whatever it is that they do for cancer screening, because it is healthcare. I'm given to understand that that is covered, as it should be, under what's basically Vermont Medicaid. And so it should be, because if you wind up getting cancer and then have to go and get it fixed, that's far more expensive than getting it checked. So I'm going to the trouble of getting it checked in the traditional way. There are apparently newer ways that don't last for as long. I'm doing it the full-on take giant amounts of laxatives and then go to the hospital, well, completely empty, and have somebody look inside you with a camera. I'm doing that. So the thing about that is that if you do that and they find anything they don't like, they can snip it out of you while they are busy looking. And that could prove handy. At any rate, it's the thing where it'll last you for the longest between checkups. Because I don't know whether healthcare is going to still be here in a while, but for now it is. And let's see what we just made happen. Ta-da! Boom! And that does appear to be moving in the right direction. You'll notice that we're taking a little more space between all of these things. We've got a fairly exaggerated tilt, but you know, if I reduce that, it will end up adjusting for it. There's a bunch of space between these, but that is partly because the gate controls and the threshold control have a bunch of blank space in between them. But it's doing a pretty good job of arranging these. It's not an exceptional job, but it's a pretty good job. I feel like the top edge of this is too close to the bottom edge of this, partly because it is so extremely steep of an angle. We really have the angle going on here. And if I stretch it a little bit, it looks a little bit better. But we're still doing an aggressively steep angle to make this happen. That said, I'm fairly happy with it. It just looks dumb, having the big empty space there. And there's only so much I can do about that. Again, if we snap it to the 2 wide, I've chosen to not have any of the 2 wide be angled because I don't have a convenient way of doing all of those. And with that, you can plainly see that the threshold and attack, and I come to think of it though, I could offset all of these. So here's the thing, this has to work in this way. Like I have all these different ways of redirecting this. Here is a entirely horizontal. Stream schedule is, I'm pretty much committed to showing up on Wednesdays just to check in. And I'm delighted that people are getting anything out of it. Back in the day, I used to do incredibly long streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And it was kind of rough. That was a lot. I'm not like professional streamers aren't also doing coding and all of this other stuff at the same time. And sometimes they have a staff. Sometimes they have additional help. I don't have any of that. So basically, I will do as much as I can. One of the things I'm thinking about doing right now is figuring out whether I can reposition some of these things. Look at this. This shows me immediately what the positioning of some of this stuff is like in a way that's very useful. Like if I can scroll up to here, because the previous stuff is basically okay. Where it says like little knob and big knob, those are the sizes. And sliders, those are the sizes. But then this is XY coordinates for each of these within the block that they're in. And I could do this a lot better. In particular, these are good. Like, these are working pretty good. But pan and fader, this is too high up. It's leaving a bunch of space at the bottom. Stone, range, and fire and air, that's leaving too much space at the bottom again. And the compressors and gates are definitely leaving too much space, so it's time for me to start adjusting some of these. I've been doing this for days. I had this crash in Reaper at one point, and so I asked Bacon Paul for help with it, and he wasn't able to reproduce the crash, so I uploaded this. It's not building correctly on GitHub yet, but I uploaded it in a way that he could get it, and he was like, all the positioning is really weird, and it's because I hadn't done all of this. All of this is positioning everything on the fly based on the needs of the sort of enclosing bounding boxes. And again, I can get real tricky with the bounding boxes because see, that could be very different. And this is the one where I have now adjusted it to take up some of the space. And then you get down to here and we wind up with the same issues where, again, these look basically okay. They're maybe scooched over a little bit to the, well, actually, I can find out, can't I? Here is our vertical layout, as if we had a proper channel strip. And we can plainly see that like fader and pan could go down a little bit there. I've got a lot more width than I need. Stone and range can go down, fire and air can go down relative to the enclosing box that they're in. But I can also, as I stretch it out, see that like these little tiny guys could scooch over just the smallest amount to the right in order to fit within this space accurately. Because A1x, B1x, C1x, Y, etc., that's the proportion within each box that everything is starting as. And there are a lot of concerns with all of it, but I'm only going to get it to where it looks nice most of the time, and I'm going to accept things like this control is not actually fitting perfectly. It's cutting off its top and bottom. But if I made it be much smaller, you wouldn't be able to see the blinking light in it as well. Speaking of which, let's put the blinking light back to red. So, what's the first thing I was thinking? Let's do these triangles. And everything is to scooch over the tiniest amount. So what are the triangles? The triangles are under this, EQs. A1X. Well, hang on, are they though? Three knob and slider. Up, yep, correct. So A23Y, that is how far down those parts are. I believe I could also fit a little farther down. And then A2X and A3X are how far across, so it needs to be slightly more across. So that much more. And then we'll start the large knob at 15 instead of 14. And moving all of those, and also while we're at it, largest knob is the first, smaller knob is the second. Or at least that's how it should be. What is going on here? Larger knobs, 0.21. Honestly, I feel as if maybe, well, no. But yes. Start at about 0.25, and they're a little more than 2/3 height for the bigger knob. The other ones are about 1/3 height. The other ones are 0.08 down, so I can nudge those down just a tiny amount. I'll start a little bit lower. Let's see where that got us. Also, this is a whole other thing. So let's see. So here's D234Y, E234Y, that is how far down the banks of three little knobs are. And we've got them fairly neatly positioned at exact thirds, and there's three of them, so that kind of works. In fact, I could have them be exactly starting at 0. See, bearing in mind, remember this is the bounding box, but the knob is not necessarily the literal size of the bounding box. Sometimes it can be. If the bounding box is not a perfect square, the knob will be whatever roundness or whatever that it needs to be to fit into that square, but it will go bumping up against the exact edges if it has to. So, .33 and 33, so that is equally positioned. And slider width in the slider initial position. But the tricky thing here is where, so let's see about maybe positioning these in thirds instead of 0.1 and 0.45. Because I got 0.15 and 0.45 for one variation, and then 0.12 and 0.52 for another variation. These are a third height. In fact, the height of both of them are a third height. Almost just throwing numbers at me. Rock on. Have fun throwing numbers. So if I positioned the starting position, which is from top to bottom is Y, at 33 and 66, I have two 1/3 height things occupying the middle and the bottom third of the space they're in. However, bust out the calculator, I know that both of those things have a height of exactly 1/3. So logically what I want to do is take the, see, three things, and rather than space the two remaining ones in exactly that position, it's like 1/3 height starting at 1/3, 1/3 height starting at 2/3, I want to move them exactly halfway up so that they're evenly spaced, and then maybe spread them out a little bit. So let's see what we must do to make that happen. It might look nice, or at least it'll look more consistent if I do that and it works. What is 0.33? Actually, come to think of it, though, that will start at hang on. Start over. 0.33 divided by 2 means that anything that I start at 0.165 will center on exactly 1/3. If it's 1/3 in height and it starts at 0.165, which none of this actually is yet, so let's fix that. That's not as much. 165 and 165. See, that one's closer. But then these other ones are not correct. So what we're going to want is 0.33 divided by 2. And then I want 0.66 minus this. So 0.66 minus 0.165. .495. So neither of these are quite correct for that, but they're both actually kind of close. I sort of guessworked them in. And so now the Y positions of each of these are starting at the same place. So let's see where we got. We've done stuff to make this work. Build succeeded, fire up twisted wave. Today I don't need to warm up the oven for tacos because today and literally every day until I have to go and get the cancer screening, I have to have chicken and rice. I'm not sure whether I need to have really bland chicken and rice at any point. I feel like the thing that they warn you about is do not drink artificially colored red stuff because it makes them think there's blood in your colon. And you don't want that. So you're not allowed to drink red or purple things in any way. All right, and we have not readjusted the sizes of these, but tell you what, we have sure readjusted the sizes of these. And the hope is that these things scooch downwards and that the position of these is more in line. I may not have scooched these controls downwards. This needs to move down. This needs to move closer to the bottom edge also, which is fine. We can do that. But the thing I was really doing was checking on the positioning of some of these things. So let's see in the 1x12 configuration. And we can see that we moved all of these very slightly to the right, and that may be imperfect, but it looks a little closer to what I would think it should be. One of the problems with the positioning of these is that when you've got it scooched in so much that the letters intersect these tinier controls, you click on the tiny control and you have mistakenly, oh no, in that case, no. You can click on the tiny control and mistakenly hit the larger one. And since that's a boost, I do have a way of telling it that the user knob mode is not rotary. I'm told that people want to just move up and down to make it work rather than this method of being able to drift way off the knob and do subtle adjustments. So I'm not sure what I have to do regarding that. I like it because it acts more like if it was a real knob. It's a realistic type of thing. Plus you can scooch away off of it and then you get to make subtler motions. So I like that more than just click on the knob and then go up and down and it will turn regardless of what that actually means. But what we've got now is a positioning of some of these things that might be more correct. So let's move from this positioning to 1 high and 12 wide. Now let's see what that looks like. Alrighty, see how these are more along the same lines, although I would not call that perfect because it's not lining up with the center line of the controls as well as I would like. I feel like the knobs need to sit a little bit lower. And I'm confirmed in thinking that by seeing that it feels like there's more space between these two than in these two. As we squish them in so that all the controls are smaller, it still looks like that. Like I'd like the center line of these little knobs to be along the same line as this slider, rather than looking like it's the line and then they're resting on top of the position of the slider. I feel like it should be in line with them. So let's go and do that right now. D234Y. So let's move them in opposite directions from each other. 49520.5. So that does the correct thing. The question is, how does this other one react? Well, we'll do the same thing. And then I'll move these up while I'm at it. And let's see where this got. I am also contemplating maybe making slider H shorter. That will force it to be a smaller knob, but then that also gets in the way of it being a illuminated knob with the LED built into it. Also, while we're fooling with things, well, hang on a second. Undo. Is that really correct? Yeah, because, I was confusing X for Y. And I'm confusing a lot of things for a lot of things, frankly. No, that should be fine. We'll see how that goes. I feel like continuing to move the Stonefire and Fader Pan. I feel like that would be a correct answer. We can but try. It was still not far enough. And I tell you what, I can go whole hog with this. I know Big Knob is 0.68. So if I bumped this from 0.24 directly to 0.32, that should put the big knobs with their controls, the label right down at the bottom. Let's see if it works. Then I'll move the little one up a tiny amount, just 'cause why not? Oh, and I know these are basically divided into thirds, which implies there might be a purpose to getting closer to the thirds positioning. So what happens if we do that? I'm getting farther away from having the large knobs in the center of those areas they're in. I've now changed several different things. Let's see what it made to happen. Also, wood stove's gone out again. Might want to attend to that. However, right now I got to try this. Looking forward to adjusting this and seeing if I can make this any nicer. However, for now, I was working on adjusting these, and I think I can move these down. Pan here, range and air here. There's room to move these down. There's also room to make this less big. But to check in the control strip version, oh yeah, there's room to scooch that down a little bit. See how fader is like literally at the bottom corner? The height positioning I think is okay. We need pan to be moved a little over. But it's farther, the offset is not what I really need. I'm looking to have it not be perfectly lined up with all these other ones with two controls near them. Although, what if I could? That's a thought. The way it's laid out, you could just have the additional tiny one be on only one side and just have it be arranged the way these are. Let's see what it looks like in the vertical arrangement. Well, I like the way these are fitting together. Make a little more space for it. Yeah, I feel like these could be positioned the same offset as the other big ones, so all of the big knobs are centered in the block that they're in. That would also make them line up with the center knob on the little sets of 3. It's in between these two knobs, which are being spaced out fairly nicely. Tell you what, wood stove. Give me a sec. If I make it real warm, it'll stay warm for a while as the night wears on later tonight. I've also got a big old pile of charcoal in there. That's why I'm putting another log in there on top of it. It'll catch in a moment. There it goes. Off you go. The whole stove is hot enough that it's still burning the smoke by way of having a more clean burn. I just need to have a fresh log on the top of that because it's just not holding on to the temperature quite as much. And I've probably still got time to engage the catalyst, and that's going to stretch out the duration of that log burning, although it'll also kind of slow it down a little bit too. We'll see. I'll try to continue to pay attention to that. If I let it just hang out and smolder a lot, what's going to happen is I'll have a giant pile of charcoal in there, and some of the charcoal will have gone unburned. So yeah, so I've got this filling up spaces, but like this fire knob, this stone knob could be positioned in the middle. This fader knob could be positioned in the middle. So let's see what we get when we do that. X is this what marks the spot there. So stone fire, fader pan, control 1 is always that, and EQ's A1X, and so there we go. Time to see whether that works. And then Y is going to be the same each time. I can even nudge it a little bit lower, knowing that these top ones. And then see EQs A23Y 0.7 F 0.7 down. So that's opposite positioning from the EQs. Although it doesn't have to be, I could make it literally match the layout of the EQs if I wanted. I am not sure whether to do that. It wouldn't be that hard. It would be like matching the layout of that little triangle with the large knob and then the two knobs underneath it, and then having both the fire and air controls and stone and range and fader and pan all following the same rules of positioning. So B2X is how far along it is. A2 is 0.06, A3 is 0.6. So if B2 was also 0.6, and C2 was also 0.06, the positioning of all of those would match, except for they're on the top rather than on the bottom. But here's the question, is that even going to work? Om Namah Shivaya, you're just saying numbers, which is fine. I don't have to pay attention to your numbers. I feel like this is you trying to help and not you just trolling me, but it doesn't really matter which it is, because I will get to the things I'm trying to create to the best of my ability. It's all good. I have it and I could release it. I'm not completely confident that it does what I hoped, but that doesn't stop me from putting it out. If it fails, it could just become Can 2 later or something like that. Let's have a quick look at this and see what we got. I need to adjust this at some point. I keep defaulting to that and then not being sure what it did. Okay, so offsets are in exactly the same places. Now these are centered. I am guardedly happy with that. See, now all the big knobs line up in the middle. All the little knobs also line up with at least these ones, but not these ones, which are wider. We do this with it. I'm fairly happy with that, although I could do better. I'm fairly happy with the positioning of these relative to those. Fairly happy with the way this is lining up. It makes it look a little like stone and low mid are part of the same thing, which they're not. But you can kind of reach everything. And the offset of these is enough where you can operate them separately. There's a little space, but it kind of makes visual sense. No. Jonathan is talking about a new plugin that you don't have. Let's, as much as that seemed basically okay, let's go to sounds, load up something else. Here's a classic. I'll load up that. This is the thing Jonathan is talking about. But you can't see it here because I haven't loaded it up enough. So this is the raw sound. And this is the headphone monitoring plugin. So you've got a room design of some sort, different sizes. Diffusion, damping, and crossfade tend to work along the lines of what you'd get in a CAN style plugin. The thing is, I'm just not that completely confident that it's doing what I want. But this would be what it's doing something kind of like CANs in monitoring, just more so. I was just looking at that. The fire is still going nicely. Crossfade is that appears to be a filter. So that's your tone control right there. And then oh, I think I remember. Diffuse was progressively making more and more things be all passes. And then it gets bigger and bigger as it goes, and dry wet is very much like, so one of the things I was wondering was whether I could actually use that for something that wasn't headphone monitoring. So to answer that question, I go and try to find if I even have it here. My drum recordings. This doesn't have the same recordings I have on my laptop, which is unfortunate. I feel bad about that. I do have drum recordings though, just not the ones I want. Well, if I load this up, I have a pretty dry drum kit. Yeah, it's a dry drum kit. So, filter. So yeah, the thing I was shooting for was the headphone supplement thing, but I'm now wondering whether I can make it do like drum room reverbs. Kinda. So yeah, if I kill crossfade, it's not centering anything. The biggest room possible is Studio E. Diffuse is how many of those are all passes rather than simple cone filters. And damping is a tone control, which is a very powerful tone control that's not letting any high frequencies in. Ooh, let me loop that part, if it'll let me. It will. So can I make this sound like a drum room? No damping. Less crossfade. More dry wet. That's not bad. And bypass. So that is giving me a room-like thing. The question then becomes, what if I do an effect stack? This is the thing that you can do in Twisted Wave, where I get to act as if it's in a DAW and add more stuff. So same thing as that. A little bit less of the intensity. Then, what the heck was the name of my recent one? I only just put it out. There are so many damn things I have to do that I can't keep track of anything. Anybody got a clue? What's the last plugin I put out? Was Hypersoft. That's the one. That's what I'm wondering about, is what happens when I throw Hypersoft on this. So, let's do 2. And I apparently don't have it on there, but maybe I have it in the AUs. I have it in the AUs. Yep, it was Hypersoft. Compare that to the dry. So I think that's not a bad drum room effect. I can make it smaller. A little drier. A little less of the all passes. More all passes. Smaller room. Too small. See, all these are Control Studio sounds. E is probably my best one. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. More dry and more gain. So I feel I could use this let's tighten that up a little bit. For times when I've recorded this being just this is a set of drum mics. It's actually 3 mics because there is a kick mic in there. For when I want to change this to this. as you can see, we can do a lot of brightness on it because the cans can provide more in the way of lows. Not a bad upgrade, I think. So yeah, so Jonathan, I take it you would like this coming weekend? Might be a good way of going about it, because I feel like I can, if it doesn't work for the headphone monitoring thing, you can use it for this. I feel like people aren't going to gripe too terribly, even if it doesn't work for the headphone monitoring part, if you can do that with it. So maybe this would be a good one for next week. How's that? Let's do it. I may or may not be on top of my game as far as the video making is concerned, because again, what with the prep that I have to do for the cancer screening, I will be on like many days in a row of like chicken and rice and only being allowed to drink water, although I will point out that I'm allowed to drink black coffee. So clearly I'm going to be all full of that. But yeah, it's a week-long prep stage of increasingly not being allowed to eat anything other than clear liquids. And so no telling whether I'm going to be on top of my game for the video making, but we should be able to do this. Even toned down quite a bit. Like, that's okay, and it's very dry sounding, but that's because I have an incredibly dead room. Let me fire this up. It immediately sounds more like it's a real drum room, or indeed so yeah, cool. Okay, we'll do that. Now, how are we doing with this? Let's see. Oops, that's the Xcode form. One more build. Oh, and I was going to do those 3 panels. The 3 vertical panels rather than just the 4 vertical panels. I got somewhat distracted by adjusting this stuff. So let's see where we got and whether I need any further changes through this. Surprise, I made it dark gray this time. So this should look accessible. And honestly, on the whole, I'm liking the way that things are lining up vertically. When there's 3 controls, they spread out wider, which I think is fine. You can also squish them in to be this big without making them any smaller. This is basically a microscopic version of the... Oh, hello. You don't go all the way to the side, do you? Well, it's fine. It's still doable. So that basically works out well, I think. I'll put it back to light gray in a moment. When we go from the single wide to Yo could be scooched over to the side a little more. That's not centered. That's not centered at all. Oh no. Oh no. No, it needs to be a little more centered than that, or at least lining up more neatly. Let's address that right now. And we're also going to put the light gray color back. It's a little too hard to see. Slider W and slider position. Slider W can go from 0.97 to 654. And the position can go from 1 to, what would be good? To 3, and we're going to see whether that changes it any. Actually, hang on. No, the whole thing needed to move over. I made it a little bit shorter, yes, but I also need to move the whole thing over quite substantially, and so I think we're going to start it at 0.06. We'll move it over even more. Okay, let's see if that worked. Yeah, the hope is I would like it to look great no matter what you do with it, and it probably isn't possible. Also, hang on a second. That's still doing okay. I didn't hear it boiling the kettle on there, so I was wondering whether it was going out. Let's see. Save, build. It will build. There it is. And let's try. Yeah, let me put out cans this coming weekend. That could be quite exciting. Especially, I mean, if I can use it to do an awesome drum room sound out of my newly completely dead drum room sound, nothing not to like about that. That's pretty awesome. So I'm down. I'm down with that. Let's do it. I am less confident that it's the perfect solution for mixing with headphones on. I'd like it to be. That would be great. I'm not sure if that's realistic to expect, though. But that's going to require some investigation. Still need to fix this. Haven't fixed this yet. Still need to fix that. Okay, now the horizontal sliders, they're a little bit narrower, but they're lining up the way they're supposed to. They're in the middle of the vertical slice. Seems good. The positioning of these things seems good. The fact that they're positioning here, that basically seems good as well. How about too wide? Boop. We've got a slight case of click on the high pass and the low pass clicks when you're actually clicking on the word low pass in that, but that can be fixed in other ways by just kind of being aware of what that does. Same deal for if you try to click on low mid reso, which you can barely see because it's too small. Oh, no, in that case, you can actually click on it and have it do basically what you want. So cool. These seem to be lining up okay. I'm happy with the positioning of these. Again, they're meant to look like between the threshold slider and the gate slider, which are opposite extremes, is all the controls for all of these. So here's where you have the controls for what to do with the gate over it, and then here's the controls for what to do with the compressor under it. And then we've got the output level control for fire, which is literally here, and that's what all of this stuff controls. And then same with stone. This whole section controls what is output on this. And then we got our EQs over here doing this stuff. And at the very bottom, a fader knob, because I never really wound up with a great way of making a big fader thingy, which was in fact a vertical slider. I can do vertical sliders, but I don't have a great way of doing that right now. So those are supposed to look like that. And then if we're doing the so this is better. This is okay, and these are a little high up and could scooch down a little bit in order to fit in that space. Just kind of having a peek at chat while I'm at it. I don't love the fact that these become different sizes, because one thing about it is that these don't actually... is there a way I can fix that? Here's a situation where the gate, the stone and fire are side by side, but it's these whole sections in there side by side to make them work. Then we go to here, and same concern. I'd like to fix that. Maybe I can fix this. How's about this? I come up with a special way of sizing the gate where the vertical spacing of just this one control, no matter where it appears, is not scaled. And the vertical spacing of these are scaled. How's that? Does that sound like something worth trying? Let's try it and find out. 1, 6H, 2W, and then 4H and 3W. There's where it starts getting complicated. So top panel is smaller. See, slider H. That's where things get messy. Let's just remove this compensation, shall we? Anywhere it says slider H, we are not adjusting that any longer. So stone compression threshold on the top panel. Fire compression threshold, slider H again. Slider W can change if it wants, but it only has to do with PY, so we don't actually need to be concerned about that. And again, there's no adjustment of it for anything where it's all flat. Well, I'm working on it. Let's see what we can make happen. Again, the thresholds, 4H, 3W, stone comp, fire comp, both of those are thresholds up there. There's another slider H. Anywhere it says slider H, I don't think we're going to be adjusting the heights of those. All it does is make it smaller in a way that doesn't look nice. So SGT, FGT, here we go. There's another slider H. That is the height of the slider, and we don't want that adjusting. And then that was it. There's only 4 sliders in the entire control. So let's go and find the same thing over here if we can. Literally the top panel of the 3H and 4W is knobs, is tone controls. So that's already fine. And then here we have these, and they are separate. So in the middle section, nothing is being altered in terms of height. Although we do need to adjust the height of all of these things and make them close that gap a little bit. But now here we have a section where the gates and things, oh, hang on. There we go. Found it. So SCT, stone compression threshold. Slider H does not get adjusted. It's not a big adjustment, but still. ACL, stone, gate, here's another gate, slider H again, and that was it. And then for 2 height, we are not making any adjustments for tilt, and in 1 height, we're not making any adjustments for tilt. Okay, let's see if that now looks correct, rather than having the sliders take on different sizes, even though their rendering doesn't really compensate for that. Oh, hello. You're being scaled by the height of the internal thing, aren't you? It's still 2 different sizes. That's still 2 different sizes. So I know what to do about this. It's a little cumbersome, but I do know what to do about this. Because all of these have to scale according. Like this being a larger size needs to scale the knobs, and then they just kind of bunk up against each other and wind up being the same size, no matter what you do with it. But my knob sizes need to be consistent throughout. The knob sizes are being scaled by what the height is of this overall area, because that's the whole change that I just made in making this happen. And I'm happy with what it did. I'm happy with what this did, but it's doing things I don't like regarding this is now too big, this is now too small. Honestly, it would need to be the opposite to really correctly render. But we're basically cool, so here's what we do to solve that. First of all, we find out what we just did. So 3 high and 4 wide, 4 high and 3 wide, PY, guess what? We'll just do that manually. That's what PY is without any compensating. And everything ends up getting compensated, but you know what? We don't want to do any of that. So it's going to search for everywhere it says slider H. And we're just punching in the raw data as if we were not scaling anything at all. Same for here. Nothing on the top is being done because that's all just the tone controls for the 3 high. And then the middle stuff isn't getting adjusted, although we still need, that's going to be adjusted. It's still going to be adjusted. So slider H, slider H, anywhere it says slider H, we're going to use what we make slider H from before we alter it. And I think that did it. Let's find out. I don't know if I need to cast it to float, but maybe I do need to cast it to float. Anyways, open that up. Now let's see whether our sliders look nice this time. Those ones have not been adjusted from anything. That said, I'm basically happy with the looks of that. You can sure read the knobs pretty good this way anyway. And too high? Those are all flat. That seems good. My range and air knobs could be scooched down a little bit, but I'm not sure that's a good idea. I think maybe they need the slightly extra space. And now here's the moment of truth. Here is the 3 high. And our sliders now look as if the whole thing is scooched over a little bit, but not in such a way that it's really obnoxious. So I'm basically, I say I'm fine with that, and then I'm probably going to fix it. But the sizes are fine. Oh, and that's compressed threshold and then gate threshold. Because this is fire in this configuration, because I had to set it up in that configuration because this has all of the tone controls across the top. So I'm lining it up like this. And then in this configuration, the tone controls are along this line here. And again, somebody said, oh, it looks like Windows 95 or something. And I'm like, actually, I do see how that would be a compliment, because this is the kind of thing that they would have been doing back in the day. And although the way this is squished is not awesome, this is the most extreme setting for that, and I'm still basically okay with what this means for it. It's the compression thresholds, and here's the compression attack, very steeply angled. There's the ratio. You can kind of see the lettering. And then the gate is down here. And everything is between the gate and the compression thresholds, because the gate is down in the bottom. And then we've got this stuff like right in the bottom edge, so sharply canted that you can barely make any visual sense of it, but that's because I'm using an extreme setting for this. And then there we go. So now I'm wondering, well, for starters, let's fix this. This is not taking up the correct amount of space. Also, my fire's gone weak on me again. We're down to about the half hour of fiddling with this. I bet I can fix that before I'm done for the day. But I'm also making sure that, I mean, especially as the day becomes dark and cold, I'm going to make sure that the fire is still going until it's basically bedtime. And that way, when I get up tomorrow morning, it'll be cold, but it won't be too crazy cold. Let's see about that. See, it burned up that whole log just for the coating. You can see all of this charcoal I have in here. That's how you make charcoal, in fact. I'm going to put a big log on and then maybe not run the damper. Maybe I'll run the damper. Maybe I won't run the damper. Away you go. And then I've got this down here, which is also a damper. But that's for damping down the total heat output of the stove. And I don't really need to damp down the whole total heat output of the stove because I'm basically running at full crank this whole entire time just in order to keep warm for the winter. You can get bigger stoves than this. This is not the biggest stove one can get, so it's doing its best. It's not really big enough to throw lots of logs in and just crank it up. So let's see, where were we at? We were going to expand the size of this, that's what. Because each of these panels could be bigger and take up more space. Every single one could. Yeah, well, I mean, it's a natural choice for me because it's like, that's the thing I'm going to be doing. I'm contemplating maybe just moving the stove camp in even closer or just fooling around with this stuff until it's an even better stove camp. Because I'm just kind of bringing it out from where my keyboard's set. And, you know, technically it could live sitting closer to the stove, so I don't think it's going to hurt it being too close. It's a fairly wide-angle lens, though. But anyway, gotta love the stove cam. So let's make these take up more space. I've been talking about that this entire time. 3 high and 4 wide. Here we go. So 3 high, 4 wide. That's what we default to. That's how we're going to try to make it work. And here's how we go about doing that. So top panel is smaller. Offset starts at 0. PY minus this much. If I have this be even larger, like minus PY times skew entirely, then the top panel will be even smaller than that. But we don't necessarily want that. Instead, we want to minus less. So we'll try that. And then middle panel becomes entirely larger than that. And then let's see, so 33. And then the bottom panel goes from that to this. So we haven't repositioned any of those, but if I'm not mistaken, we've made all of those panels vertically larger. That might cause them to intersect with each other, or who knows what, but I will know what when I fire it up and see what it did. I think that's a splendid idea. Let's do exactly that. Boom. And I think that works beautifully, except for we now need to move this middle panel up. See how high pass is crossing over pan? But everything else looks gorgeous. It scooches a bunch of these real close to the bottom edge, but that is very much a factor of how intensely tilted it became. This is as tall as we can make it. It's basically fine except for where high pass and pan intersect with each other. And the size of the middle one looks fine as it's going. Like, boop. And then we've got these stretched out ones that are taking up less space. All of this needs to scooch upwards just a bit, but honestly, that seems to be... I'm sort of okay with it, but I don't really like the way these line up because FG threshold could be lower down than that. Because it's on the high side if it intersected these, and it's supposed to be all part of the same thing. I'm questioning everything while I'm questioning this. Let's go and move the whole thing up. So offset Y. Offset Y is py times 2. So, well, now hang on a second. Nope, that's the third step down. This is the bottom panel. Bottom panel is fine. I'm pretty sure the bottom panel is in the right place. Offset Y plus... Let's dial that back too. And here's the one where this really needs to step up a bit. So what happens if we change this from 3.3 to 6.6? Because offset Y for this middle section is py minus this. So if this becomes larger, then that center section will move up. Might even go for full-on py times skew, not scale it back at all. Let's see if it was enough. The idea is to make it be enough. Oh, it's a little too much. Will you look at that? Air is now intersecting with low-mid frequency. And high pass is trying to intersect with pan. So that's an interesting combination right there. It is very close to dead on, honestly. It's behaving itself pretty good. Remembering, of course, that if I get it perfectly with this steep of a angle factor, I could make the default for the plugin, if you don't go in and put a user tilt value of like full crank in there, then I can make this be slightly less aggressive looking, which will also apply to this, where these are all looking kind of aggressive because it's a 4 tall and steps in that way. Again, if I make it be 0 tilt, then it's going to be laid out like this. The whole tilt thing is for me having fun with these very rectangular laid out looking things, where we get to do fun arrangements of this and take advantage of the ability of my custom knobs. All of these knobs are drawn in the same way, and it's going to be applied to all future plugins as well, where I can set up the custom knobs so that they take up this much space, this much clickable space, but not as much vertical space, so I can fit more of them And also do things like, oh, look, we're looking across the surface of the controls, the control panel. And then dial it back just enough to have it not be obnoxious, because this is a little obnoxious looking. And then be able to set this kind of thing up. So what shall we do here? We shall have it not scooch the middle section up quite as much, but I'm liking the sizes of everything. Although it's exaggerating the sizes of everything just a bit. So let's adjust both of those things while we're at it. I always like changing two things at once. It's foolish, but what are you going to do? Middle panel. Middle panel is larger, but not if we go times. Now middle panel is slightly less large than that. And if I do 9.5, middle panel is slightly less large than that. And then if we subtract less of this, then its offset is slightly less. And then if I just did, if the top edge is fine and the bottom edge is intersecting a little bit, I can just reduce this 9.5 to something else and it'll work perfectly. And let's see if I nailed it. Yep. Grens, bear in mind I have had the same questions. I did not like Hydrosynth, even though it has the wonderful poly pressure sensitive keyboard, because it's just aliasing happy, and that's me saying it. I'm usually pretty tolerant of aliasing, but I did not like what the Hydrosynth's tone was. And then as far as the Udo is concerned, have you considered the Novation Peak or Summit? I ended up getting one of those. So go and listen to more YouTube videos. If you're checking out like Hydrosynth or specifically the Udo, because the Udo is even more expensive than a Novation, but it's using some of the same technologies. And if you're really hot for the Udo's like sonorous penetrating tone, the Novation stuff will do it. It will. I haven't used mine as much as I would like. I'm very happy about it, but I haven't used it as much as I would like. Okay, how are we doing? Not too bad. So let's audition the way that this area looks and the way that this area looks. It needs to not have this air knob intersecting with low-mid frequency. And this has even more space than I need. So we're getting pretty close to perfection. Although granted, this is a little squished, but there's not a lot I can do about that. One of the things I wanted to do also was draw a line between the sections to show what was like stone and what was fire and so on. I also like the fact that if you had range set right down to next to nothing so that the stone was only super subsonic things, which people use like high-pass filters on compression sometimes for that exact purpose. So that would work. Then your entire fire section, which is most of your sound, has the big controls on it. Here's your compression threshold. Here's your gate threshold. I am speculating on making all of these scooch down a little bit more. Also, what the heck is going on with this? Why is there a bunch of space between these, but not space between these? What is going on there? I would like an explanation for that one. Is it doing the same thing at like one height? No, you see now that looks basically normal. That looks fairly much in line, although not completely, I must say. We do what we can. I'm trying to make it all look nice. And have it set up in such a way where you kind of can figure out what you're doing. Again, this is 2x6. So these are separate boxes with like the fire and the stone dynamics. Whereas as soon as you move it over here, I have this enormous extra space between this and this, and this and this. I mean, on my control surface, it's simply a bank of faders. There's 4 faders, and they're just lined up in this way. So I don't technically have to have them like I could have a bank of 3 knobs like right up on the top here for the comps and have the threshold under them. I was just trying to sandwich the whole thing between the sliders, but maybe what I should be thinking about is sandwiching it between the sections. Because see, there's my gate threshold. I could put the compression threshold under these knobs, and that would kind of line up. Like, what's better, knobs or slider on top? Because when we do this, all of these could line up neatly, and they are color-coded, so you know that the ones in green are gate, and the unlabeled ones are, like, on my control surface, they're in white. And so they are on an SSL. But in this, they're just blank. I could color-code them white. It wouldn't look quite as slick as my little graphics on there, but I could color code them in white. Hey, beans, beef, broccoli. I'm on my last 15 minutes and we're trying to make this stuff look good and really running with some ideas on how to maybe make that happen. Namely, maybe these... I'm still trying to work out whether the knobs should be like, if the knobs are always underneath the slider for threshold, then this section ends up looking this way, and this section would also look the same way. Likewise, you could have either combination of these, like, does the knob look better on top or underneath? Maybe it looks better on top simply because with the EQs the knobs are underneath. How does that sound? Like with the dynamics, the knobs are on top and there's the threshold control. You just have to pay attention to what it's doing and which one it is to know. But for the bands of EQ, or indeed this low pass, high pass, top dB, the little knobs are on the bottom. How about that? Shall we try that? Little knobs on top. I'll tell you how that's going to work too. All we have to do, since this is operating all of these things within the blocks that they are in, we don't actually need all of these controls either. I'll be able to replace whole sections of these. So here's the initial slider. Yeah, no, I'm liking it. I want to scooch all of these over. And slider on top. Oh, no, no, no. Instead, we're going to always do slider on bottom. So this slider ends up becoming 0.5 always, and the knobs end up becoming 0.16 always. And if this works, I can remove all of the D and E and make them all work by D, which means running fewer random variables everywhere. And that'll be nice. Like, some of this stuff is not consistent enough. Stonefire and Fader Pan are arranged slightly differently. Different sides of the pan. Which doesn't mean that I have to do that. Let's consider that. But we've just done this, so all I have to do is hit save and build. And let's see what knobs on top looks like for all of them. Because that's going to do it. Because it's algorithmically laid out. There we go. So with that, here's the compression thresholds. Knobs on top for that. They don't have to be as tilted as this, but in this case they are. Here's the gates. Here's even more. The funny thing about this is it looks very much like, for this, SC threshold needs to move up, but for this, the gate threshold and all should move down. Knobs on top, compression, and then gate. Again, C threshold, a lot of space between these. And then there's our compression threshold right up on top there. Little space between these things. And that is our extremely... So now here's the thing I am now wondering. If these knobs are all centered, what if the additional one up in the top corner is always in the top corner? Like, why do I have pan on the opposite side? Does it look better under some circumstances? Under this circumstance, we've got like range and air up in this corner, but then pan is kind of over here instead. Now, the whole positioning of that is very weird because we've pushed it so hard in this direction. With this one, we've got air up here, right below low mid frequency. We've aggressively pushed the exaggeration of the tilt as hard as possible. FC threshold feels like it's kind of high up here, but the knobs are basically okay. I'm just trying to see whether there always feels like there's more space for these. Like, here's SE threshold. You turn it down to compress, and then SG threshold, you turn it up to make it engage the gate. I think that's basically okay. I just feel like because I'm not sure that it helps to have, well, first of all, let's see whether we can make like fire and air or stone and range intersect with each other under any circumstances. Because those are the ones that we don't want to intersect. And this looks like it's doing a fairly good job. The question becomes, do I want to scooch these little knobs up so that they're along the same line as the other top knob even though they are not like the same thing. This is a yellow knob for air, and then this is gates, and this is compression. And then there's a pan that could go over to the corner. If I scooched this over to the position of one of these three, it would stay out of the way of the big central one, but it would also be a neat little row of, we could have these all lining up very accurately with each other. I'm just not sure if that's what I want to do, but I could do it. If we make them incredibly minuscule, the tiny sizes line up better here, but this is not a usable size. Like, none of this is actually usable under the circumstances. You gotta make it bigger. And when you make it bigger, here's how we stretch it. So I am starting to think that we want to, okay, so maybe I want to split the difference between these, right? Like when I make them impossibly too small, these tiny ones, and you'll note I can still manipulate these, it's just horrible, are more in an acceptable position, and these ones here are starting to intersect the meter. And if I scrunch it up like this, these tiny ones in the corner might be seen as too high, and these ones are trying to intersect with something. So let's converge those, shall we? Vertical height of things like Stonefire and Fader Pan. The small knob. Also the X position. So B1X and C1X, those are the same for the big knob. Big knob, same thing. In fact, I think I could even step those down the tiniest amount. Oh no, that's Y. That's across, isn't it? Hang on. No, Y is down. What am I thinking about? I got it. I've got this figured out. Maybe, sort of, kind of. We'll see. But the Y is down, X is across. So if this was instead 0.6, or maybe even a step farther than that. Oh, remember, it was going to be, they have to be in the same position as the ones that go in threes. That would mean that the tiny ones go all the way over to 0.67, just like DX and EX are 0.67. Bearing in mind, I can get rid of this entire section, rename them. I can change those over. And by the same token, if these are the same, then that'll work for all of those too. Meaning we've got one type for EQs. We've got sizes for all of these that we can fool with. We've got the two knob controls that will line up exactly with the row of 3 across ones. And we can make those line up exactly the way they should. And we want them to be converging on the same Y position. So what's that going to mean? That's going to mean that Stonefire, Fader, Pan, the second control, control 2, the smaller control. X is across, Y is down. This Y is 0.08. It is not big enough. This y is 0.16. It's too far down. So 12 is exactly halfway. I think I got too fancy with positioning all of these. And while we're at it, ooh, I don't know though, I see a well, that's interesting. No, that's correct. That's fine. So my X position starts at 0, then 3, 3, then 6, 6. I had it at 6, 7. You know why? Because rounding from 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, exactly a equal is closer to 6, 7 than it is to 6, 6. So let's just add a couple of other decimal places to it, and we're going to have it be exactly in the thirds. And we're going to have that be 4 6s for one better than the beast. You always got to be one better than the beast, right? And let's see what we've got. Getting close to the end of stream, although I don't, it's not like I have something challenging like tacos to cook, so I don't desperately have to cut off exactly at 5, but I am going to start winding down. What do we got? That's kind of neat. That's kind of neat. Fader and then a little pan in that same position. These are neatly laid out. I'm trying to make fire and air intersect with each other again. It's definitely leaving a lot more space with everything. It feels easier to parse visually, I think. I would like to step these closer than each other, but then that means they will intersect with the word written here, and that's not great. So maybe I don't want to do that. That also looks okay. It has an orderly look to it. Like you can scooch it around and there's this basically orderly look to it where it's like, okay, yeah, this feels like a consistent thing of some kind. Like I could probably figure out how to make this work. Glance at that. I'm not entirely thrilled by the way in which CPAN is slightly farther over from top DV there. We could just space these guys out a little bit. That might be interesting. It would make them go closer to the edge rather than neatly placed here. There'd be more of a empty spot in there. Ooh, I would hope that I can make it look more like a proper piece of gear. And what I don't like about having these spaced wider so that they would line up with these controls is that it would make like low mid freq and high mid reso right next to each other, although they are given different colors. But there is a confusion factor to that which I don't love. And then when you squish it to be microscopic, it becomes microscopic, and you sure can't use this except for, guess what? You actually can. You don't want to. It seems like not great, but you could. And it only as it becomes totally microscopic does it disappear into the meter. And then you bring it out, and it looks like that. Yeah, I could live with this. It doesn't really make any sense that air bunks up against the gate stuff here, and range bunks up against the gate stuff there, but it makes it look like it's a line of knobs on physical gear. I do wonder about the positioning of these, though. Like, is it enough of a benefit having them not positioned that way? Because positioning them that way would leave space for the label. So there's that. On the other hand, positioning them that way would mean that we'd have this EQ section. And then when it's like this, these additional controls would be scooched over to the side, and I don't think that would look as good. Here's a thought. What if these guys that are like pan and range and air don't line up with this column, but they line up with this column? Let's see what that looks like. And in the vertical arrangement, it would scooch them over closer to the central ones. And then this would line up with these columns, which are a little more spaced out, so you can kind of see what they're doing. And let's just see what that would do. So that would be Stonefire fader pan, or fader pan here, and then the 2x, rather than being this, which is in line with this, it would be in line with, rather than 0.6 and 0.6, it would line up like this. There. Now our Stonefire fader pan lines up with the EQs instead. What about vertically? It doesn't matter. At least I don't think it matters. Do those knobs look as if they're too far down? Let's fire this off. If this works, the last thing I do for a stream is delete these additional variables, because the fewer variables I can have in this as it runs, the more efficiently it will go. These modern computers can do all manner of calculations in the middle of things, but they don't like keeping extra variables around. The fewest of those you can handle, the better off you are. So let's see now what that looks like. We're doing a sort of page layout looking thing, but it's all completely dynamic. And let's see where we got. So there's top DB lined up with pan. Air and range are now lined up with this, but they're not part of this bank. But what happens when we do this? Okay, little bit of extra space separating these. It seems like that could work. Squish it, they become tiny. Here's the vertical arrangement. The vertical arrangement leaves more space between the gate and compression stuff and the centralized outputs of these circuits, and scooches this over so it's a little bit of visual space, but it also lines up with the low mid one or the top dB one, so that's not bad. That's not bad. I wonder if I'm in a position where I could actually tighten these even more. Or whether I could enlarge the tininess of the tiniest ones. Or enlarge the size of all of these until they start bunking up against each other again. See, there's stone and range starting to touch each other. But on the whole, as I start manipulating these, it's kind of filling up the space as well as it can. Yeah. This is an arrangement that I think works fairly well visually. I believe it's doing the right basic things. It's definitely a lot better than it was when I started. And there's our fader and pan. Right in this column, that looks designed, that looks correct. And then the air and the range are offset from those, so that also starts to look a little bit more like it's meant to not line up with those, because it serves a different function, you see. And then if we make a single tall stack, I'm going to say that still basically looks about right, although it's hilarious fitting this many controls into this small of a space, but I think it actually works. You even have a bit of visual space between the dynamic section and low pass, high pass, top dB. Low pass, high pass is supposed to be on top of the EQs if you're actually working on a real SSL console or some big console designed the same way. So that's looks like we are on the right track. Little knob size goes to 35, big knob size goes to 69. I'm going to take slider H size to 32. Sometimes those knobs are bigger than they should be. And now we're going to quickly go through and every time it complains that we're redefining it, that means I've successfully consolidated those two things. And I get to use one fewer variable. C2X, lovely. Coming along okay, and B2Y lastly, and then we got the other bank. Boop. So got that. Now these E ones. Let's consolidate that. I wonder if I can do them before fixing them. Wait, hang on a second. I can make all of those be C rather than D. Let's do that. Fewer controls. And these won't complain when I do them. This would be a nice thing to finish up on. There we go. I'm pretty sure the resize I'm trying to achieve is unique because it's enormous pain and nobody else would bother going to this much trouble over it. But I'm excited about it and I want all of my plugins to work this way and be this reconfigurable. Now let's see whether I can do these even when it is complaining about them. Signs point to yes, so that's quick. Less time spent deleting things between renames. Got it. And these should be exactly the same as before, looks like it, so. And now it should be happy. Let's see whether we got anywhere with all of this. Okay, we have now also made all of the knobs a little bit bigger, except for the sliders get to be a tiny bit smaller than they had been. Can we make these knobs bunk up against each other by resizing them? Looks like not quite. How about now? Now that still looks basically cool. That looks designed. What do we got now? Can we make them bunk up against each other? No? How about now? That's limited by vertical space. Absolutely. So, boop. Okay, our largest knob sizes, fire and air, are just barely on the verge of touching each other. Likewise for fader and pan, of course. And that is because of the amount of space we've allotted for controls. These end up, yeah, we can have these become big enough to intersect a little bit. Low pass, the title low pass is being drawn over the knob of high pass, but as soon as you scooch it a little bit, it cleans up. But I'd rather have it be drawn a little bit large and still try to be readable. Also, having these be limited to smaller is stopping these lines of text from being drawn too big. It's a little too big, but it's not wildly too big. In fact, under these circumstances, the size of the text is about the same, which it's supposed to be. There's our four-way. With our knobs absolutely squishing into each other, so we can't really make them any larger than this. That's probably okay, right? I don't have to make these any smaller. I can limit them so that I force them to be smaller, but these ones aren't bumping into each other. These ones are probably okay. And here's another layout. Or a default layout, in fact. And that looks basically okay, although it will look less aggressive when we don't have user tilt at full crank. So if we dial back user tilt so it doesn't default to 1 and you let people crank it up even more if they love it, Photos, I can make it not have a 3D look at a moment's notice. I will do so in a moment. But this is what it might ship like, with just slightly less exaggerated, or I can even pull it back more than that, but that's kind of neat. Well, I put a lot of work into being able to do that, so we're going to be kind of stuck with it, but I will this is user controllable. Understand, Photos, that if you don't like it, all you got to do is this. User tilt 0.0, and all Airwindows plugins that you own which use that technology, because that's built into my knob code, will now look like this. So that presumably looks less dated, or maybe you want the entire design of the knobs to look different, in which case, sorry, that is what I'm looking to do. But if you did want, oh, look at how that's funny. That's rendering as if there is sound showing up. So if you didn't want this stuff taking up equal space there, you go to Airwindows Globals and you tell it something else, like 75, for instance. Still fairly tilty. And then the next time you open it, you got this 3D recess effect, where if you exaggerated it even more, hang on. If you can't get enough of that visual effect, you get to crank it out to the absolute maximum limits. That being, oh, well, if you like it without the user tilt, get used to Airwindows Globals. That is how that is done. You have that little file, and that little file will do all the things that you want. Now, I'm sorry, I love the inner bevel effect, because the inner bevel effect is being drawn programmatically. Meaning that if we make a giant, huge rendering, Like if you have a incredibly high resolution screen. Oh no, that part is staying. You haven't seen it at full crank. It's all being redesigned for larger and larger screens, and details like this, where you'll notice that we've got the color there, but also I can do this. There is a chamfered edge inside the line that's being drawn. The bigger I make this interface, the bigger I make this knob, the more clearly the thumb is rendered to look like a physical thing, which is catching the light here, and it's got this chamfered little channel in there, and then there is a tiny little plastic edge on the inside corner there where the light is catching. And that is the case for the fire knob, or the screen knob, which is smaller so you can't see it quite as easily, or these compression knobs. And it makes it look a little bit more elegant. Same thing for the blinking lights. Once they start going, you see them blinking. But the blinking lights. So yeah, that's why this. That's why the beveled things that remind you of Windows 95 are the way they are, because it is being designed in advance for when there are unreasonably high fidelity. Like, in theory, this should draw very nicely on like Retina screens and stuff. Oh, I see that my stuff is overlapping a little bit down here, but maybe I'll fix that before I'm completely done. You think? Maybe we'll fix that. Quit out of here. And then little knob can go down to 34, and we'll see whether that's any better. It's open source code. If anybody wanted to have this literal look, they can use it as open source code. It works under Pamplejuice, so you can start with Pamplejuice and just bring all of this in. It is implemented by this code, Airwindows look and feel. So you basically include Airwindows look and feel and use it the way that I do, and it is made easy. Here's the H file for it. It includes all the background image stuff, everything. So let's see now. I'm going to finish off by going to Documents, Airwindows, and finding a pretty color. It's supposed to be stainless steel. Well, it's a gray and it's got a little tiny bit of texture to it. Guess what? Our final glimpse of this is going to be with a texture and a cooler font. And we're going to see whether those knobs intersect with each other. Or maybe I've dialed it back just enough that it's exactly what it needs to be. Build. We'll save that. Fire this up. With this, I am not showing values any more than you would really get them on a channel strip. A lot of stuff, you don't really see those things. And here we are. So it's a slightly darker gray. And this is now as squinched as I can make these controls. They're kind of touching each other, but not so much that it's completely excruciating. And we've got our cool modern look. One thing about it is that when you do have the texture over everything, the texture does not rotate with the knob. But now we have a cooler looking, like, font looking thing. We've substituted the font, and we've substituted a texture. And so this is your interface. Unless you want to flatten out the interface, or you could just flatten out the interface this way. Because I decided there was no point in having the 2x6 be completely vertically squished. At this point, I think it's good to have it just be vertical. And then, of course, in the 1, we're good. And yeah, we're drawing over the other controls a little bit, but that's because you can reposition it if you wanted to not do that. So if stuff is too squished, move it until it's not. Move it until it looks nice. I could do with a vertical line separating these things. It would be one there and then another vertical line separating this stuff, but I don't know. We're probably good. And we didn't fire up the new Cans plugin combined with Hypersoft to make the overwhelmingly powerful drum sound. But that will be for another day. So yeah, it looks cool, guys. We're getting there. This is getting right up to the point where I could start building the final versions, which involves lots of typing and copying and editing and stuff. But I could start building the final versions and putting the audio code in there, and we start actually using it. I do wonder whether it would be nice to put white color coding for some of these, but I'm kind of inclined to just leave that out, because if I go with a fully black interface, like for instance, what would be a good fully black interface? Well, that's not that. Not that. Okay, so is that actually good looking though? That's not nearly dark enough. No, that's probably about as close to black as I can get, unless I want to go with... Which black do you want to see? Charred timber or granite? Stone? Or incredibly dark wood color? Let's go with stone. Machroma as a font looks like stone. Actually, I could also do Jupiter. Gimme. Copy. Here we are. Note that I don't have to reboot the audio program. I only have to reopen the plugin. You probably don't have Jupiter, but I bought it. It's one of your like all caps fonts. That should work. Save that. And we will go from Machroma and stainless steel look to... Oh no. Far too cool. Oh, that's just, I'm sorry, that's just way too cool. Jupiter is too large of a font for the purposes of this, but by God, it worked. Hee. It does its best. It tries its best. one thing about it, when we have the tiny vertical alignment, the controls are now labeled. You can read the labels when it's like this. Scrunch. Yeah, picking a font that is too large does come in with problems. But by gosh, it kind of worked. And this is a really good ultra dark look with letters that are way too big. But you can read them. Medieval and futuristic all at the same time. And again, the knobs still do not turn when you tell them to. Let's have user tilt be slightly less big than that. Golden ratio for user tilt. And reload. Now user tilt is less extreme. And man, those letters are too big. But strangely enough, they still kind of draw. I can't think of any other good fonts to use. I bet if I do something simple like Times, it will not actually... I don't want to have anything to do with Times, but what the hey. More of a tilt. Because the thing that I do know about that is that it will cause it to be a serifed font, so it might work with the look. And yeah, it's very visible. Looks a little sketchy. You can kind of see what everything is. You can make it small, or we can make it a horizontal channel strip. And of course, while we're at it, not to forget that Airwindows Meter already does this. See? And you'll notice it is also using the same texture. And so on that note, as the fire begins to fade, I will say goodnight, and I'm off to make some chicken and rice. And I'll be giving you folks cans, which you heard earlier, this coming weekend. And wish me luck that I will feel up to making the videos. I'll do my best, but I'm going to be on like an increasingly like rice and water diet and having to lay off all manner of things. Like normally I take vitamins, especially in winter. I like taking vitamins that include vitamin D, and not being able to take those because I was told not to, I find very distressing. But I was told, I was talking to my therapist, I was told that I can go outside to where the sun is shining and it's really bright, and the sun hitting your retinas is apparently what gives you vitamin D that way, so I can get a sort of natural dose of that, and hopefully I won't crater too hard. It's only until this coming Tuesday, and then we shall see what we shall see. But on that note, talk to you later. Bye-bye.